Have you ever noticed how the things you crave the most are often the very things that quietly dismantle you? Not in dramatic, obvious ways. Not in the ways you see in movies, where the addict spirals in a blaze of self-destruction. But slowly, quietly, in moments no one else sees. That extra drink after work. The late-night scrolling when you told yourself you'd stop. The relationship you can't walk away from, even though it devours pieces of you every time you stay. These aren't grand disasters. They're tiny, repeated choices. Invisible hooks buried deep beneath the surface of your life. You justify them. You call them comforts, coping mechanisms, harmless distractions. But deep down, you know, there's a part of you whispering that these small indulgences have teeth. And over time, they'll consume the parts of you that once dreamed, that once fought for more. What if I told you this isn't weakness? That it's not about a lack of willpower or self-discipline? What if addiction, in all its forms, isn't just a chemical imbalance or a bad habit, but something far older, far deeper? A psychic wound, a shadow within you that Carl Jung, one of the most brilliant minds in psychology, spent his life trying to understand. Today, we're not just talking about addiction to substances. We're talking about addiction to people, to approval, to work, to suffering, to anything that gives you temporary relief while quietly taking pieces of your soul. And we'll unravel why Jung believed that these compulsions aren't about the object of addiction itself, but about your fractured relationship with your own unconscious mind. He called it psychic possession, a condition where a part of your psyche hijacks the rest of you, operating in secrecy, pulling you toward things you don't consciously want. You think you're in control. You aren't, at least not fully. But what if you could be? In this video, we'll uncover what Carl Jung truly believed about addiction. Not the watered-down pop psychology version you might have heard. Not the 12-step slogans or the modern self-help cliches. But the darker, uncomfortable truth he warned about. That every addiction is the shadow's way of crying out to be seen. We'll explore how addiction is less about what you can't stop doing and more about what you're refusing to confront within yourself. We'll talk about the concept of psychic energy, how your life force, your creative and emotional reserves, can get trapped in patterns of compulsion. We'll unravel how our culture secretly engineers addiction by keeping you disconnected from your inner world. And most importantly, you'll learn how to take your energy back, not by fighting your addictions head-on, but by starving them of the energy they feed on and returning that power to yourself. Imagine a man. Let's call him Daniel. Daniel's life looks fine on the surface. He has a steady job, friends, a gym membership, an apartment decorated with small, careful touches that suggest a man who has things under control. But every night, Daniel drinks. Not because he loves the taste, not because he's celebrating, but because without it, a suffocating restlessness creeps in, a quiet dread, the feeling that something essential is missing. The alcohol isn't the problem. The emptiness is. The problem is the wound he refuses to look at, the unresolved grief over a father who left, the years of pretending everything was fine, the endless pressure to perform, to appear unshaken. The drink is just the ritual. The real addiction is to avoiding himself. And in ways large and small, we're all Daniel. Some of us drink. Some of us work obsessively. Some chase relationships. Some scroll for hours. Some overeat. Some undereat. Some become addicted to suffering itself. The forms differ. The root is the same. Carl Jung didn't believe in treating surface symptoms. He wasn't interested in getting people to quit drinking while leaving the wound intact. He believed in going deeper, in facing the shadow directly, in integrating the parts of ourselves we've buried because they were too painful, too unacceptable, too dark. He called this process individuation, the journey toward wholeness. A process not for the faint of heart, but for those who were finally fed up with living half-lives. So today, I invite you to follow this thread, not for entertainment, not for casual curiosity, but because somewhere in you, a part has grown weary of distraction, weary of addiction in its many forms, weary of being possessed by what you refuse to confront. You're not weak. You're not broken. You're fragmented. And today, we'll start stitching those pieces back together. In the next section, we'll break down Carl Jung's theory of psychic energy and why the things you obsessively cling to are the very things draining your life force. And more importantly, how to take it back. Imagine your psyche as a vast reservoir of sunlight-charged water, what Jung called psychic energy. Every thought, feeling, and action draws from this reservoir. When you pour your energy into creativity, love, or purposeful work, the reservoir renews itself with meaning and vitality. But when you pour that same energy into compulsions, substances, behaviors, or relationships promising relief, you create leaks. Jung believed that every addiction represents a misallocation of this energy. Instead of nourishing your conscious goals and authentic self, you funnel life force into fleeting urges. Over time, this misdirection deepens unconscious complexes, knots of repressed feelings and memories, and weakens your ego's ability to steer your life. As Jung put it, consciousness has no power over this energy once it is seized by the complex. Complexes act like psychological whirlpools. A wounded complex might originate in childhood trauma, abandonment, or shame. Each unhealed wound pulls at your reservoir, drawing energy away from consciousness. The more you ignore the wound, the stronger its pull, and the more powerful its hold becomes. This is psychic possession, when a complex seizes control, steering your thoughts and behaviors into addictive spirals. Integration, bringing the complex's contents into awareness, is the antidote. As you allow those buried parts of yourself to surface, the compulsion begins to lose its grip, and you reclaim scattered energy. Every act of addiction carries a shadow message. See me. I've been buried. The shadow is the sum of all parts of yourself you've disowned, traits, desires, fears deemed unacceptable. Ignoring the shadow intensifies its signal, fueling compulsion until escape becomes impossible. In everyday life, we project our unmet needs onto substances or people, expecting them to fill psychic voids. This transference perpetuates addiction because nothing external can heal an internal wound. Consider Maria, who began drinking to numb the pain of a difficult divorce. Each evening's glass offered temporary peace, but left her waking in a fog of guilt and emptiness. The real wound wasn't the divorce itself, but a lifelong pattern of people-pleasing that made her marriage subservient to others' needs. Alcohol became an external fix for an internal fracture. Then think of James, glued to his smartphone. Notifications spike his dopamine, soothe his loneliness, and distract him from the fear that he's unworthy unless constantly validated online. His harmless scrolling bleeds hours from his day, fracturing his attention and leaving him hollow afterward. And there's Sophia, endlessly chasing romantic attachment. The high of new love masks the old story. Without another person, she feels unloved and unlovable. Each breakup reignites that core wound, and each rebound relationship is a desperate bid to heal something that only self-awareness and inner work can cure. Jung reframed addiction not as a moral failing but as a symptom. You aren't weak, you're wounded. Every wound carries its own intelligence, a message urging you to integrate what you've disowned. He warned that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. True freedom thus arises not from punitive abstinence, but from bringing shadow contents into the light. In that illumination, the addictive object loses its allure, starved of the psychic energy it once consumed. Have you ever felt that? No matter how much you give of your time, your attention, your love, you remain unseen? That the more you pour yourself into someone or something, the more dissolved you become? Carl Jung called this the paradox of availability. You think you're proving care and loyalty, but in truth, you're erasing yourself. When you make your emotional presence a constant, you surrender the very boundaries that let you feel distinct and alive. Invisibility becomes your reward, not intimacy. Think about the colleague who always covers for everyone else, who takes on extra projects so no one else has to struggle. On the surface, they're the team's backbone. But inside, they're a hollow echo chamber. Every favor granted chips away at their sense of self until they no longer know what they want, only what they think everyone else needs. They burn out. They disappear. And the people they help barely notice their absence. What if addiction, whether to substances, behaviors, or relationships, is nothing more than an extreme version of this self-erasure? A compulsion born from the unconscious demand. Notice me. Jung described it as a cry from the shadow, the hidden part of the psyche we refuse to acknowledge. Every time we succumb to an urge, we're answering that cry, but in a way that feeds the wound rather than heals it. We distract ourselves from the pain instead of naming it. We numb the ache instead of tracing its origin. Consider how modern culture dangles distractions like glittering baubles. Endless streaming options, constant connectivity, 24-hour shopping, binge culture, microtransactions in games, social media, likes. Each click or swipe puts a tiny patch over the same yawning gap in our hearts. We've learned to equate relief with fulfillment, to mistake stimulus for nourishment. In that sense, society isn't just passively permissive of addiction, it actively engineers it. Studies on digital device dependency report that each notification triggers a dopamine hit comparable to certain addictive substances, creating loops of compulsion that mirror more traditional addictions. Montag et al., 2018. And yet, the most unsettling truth is that you are not a helpless victim of genes or circumstances. You are a co-author of your own entrapment. You willingly hand over pieces of your inner life to anything that promises ease. You trade depth for distraction. You wear invisibility as a cloak because you fear what might happen if you choose to feel. What if the grief emerges too raw? What if the rage is too fierce? What if, in the silence beyond distraction, you confront a self you don't recognize? What if that self, the fractured self yearning to be whole, is exactly what needs your attention most? Jung insisted that psychic energy is finite, like water in a well. If you siphon it off into endless diversions, there's nothing left to draw with your conscious will. Your creative spark dims. Your vitality drains. Your relationships become shallow mimicries of real connection. And yet, every modern self-help trinket claims to show you how to be happy while leaving you starved of energy. It's the final, cruel twist, solutions that perpetuate the problem. Now, imagine a person so terrified of emptiness that they fill every waking moment with noise, podcasts at breakfast, music on the commute, TV at dinner, phone in hand at bedtime. They sleep with the device next to their pillow, fearing the silence that would expose their inner abyss. They call themselves busy, multitaskers, efficient, yet efficiency becomes their shrine. Efficiency is their idol because it guarantees no moment unmediated by distraction. They mistake doing for being. But this frantic busyness is a form of self-punishment. It's a refusal to sit with the very feelings they fear: loneliness, worthlessness, regret, heartbreak. And while they convince themselves they're living life to the fullest, the same studies that chart compulsive smartphone use also reveal rising levels of anxiety and depression among always-on individuals. Lin et al., 2016. They trade inner peace for the illusion of control, a control that evaporates the moment the device is out of reach. What if addiction isn't an external problem to be solved by abstinence alone, but an internal shape-shifting beast that thrives anywhere it can bleed your attention? Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." The more you ignore the shadow signals, mood swings, cravings, restlessness, the more forceful those signals become. They'll hijack your mind in the form of a cigarette craving, a sugar binge, a toxic relationship, or an insatiable need for validation. And here's the counterintuitive insight: fighting the symptom only feeds the shadow. When you wage war on your cravings, resist. Resist. You pour more psychic energy into the very thing you want to starve. The compulsion interprets resistance as attention, as fuel. It grows stronger. The harder you push against it, the more it digs in its claws. The paradox: you must stop fighting your addiction as an enemy and start befriending it as a messenger. By listening to the underlying pain, by tracing the shadow's footprints back to their wounds, you redirect psychic energy from the compulsion into conscious awareness. The pull of the addictive pattern loses its charge because you've illuminated the darkness where it once fed. Perhaps the most unsettling societal truth is that we've colonized our inner lives with the very things that fragment them. We've erected digital walls around our consciousness, believing each notification, each purchase, each relationship will protect us. Instead, they imprison us. Addiction in any form is an invitation to examine what you've walled off, what parts of yourself you cannot bear to face. Ask yourself, what would happen if you allowed silence back into your life? What if you felt the tremor of your own heartbeat without the constant hum of distraction? What if, instead of seeking to fill the void, you leaned into the emptiness and asked it what it wanted? It would demand attention. It would demand integration. It would demand that you step into parts of yourself you've long avoided. That is the truly radical act: to sit with your shadow, to welcome its cry, and to share your psychic energy with it rather than siphon it off into numbing diversions. It feels dangerous because it is. It feels like peeling away the layers of armor you've grown accustomed to. But in that vulnerability lies the alchemy of wholeness. You begin to feel your energy return, not in bursts of adrenaline, but in the steady warmth of authenticity. The world will still offer its glittering distractions, but now you'll see them for what they are: shallow ponds that reflect only your own fears back at you. You'll no longer mistake them for real life. And in that clarity lies your freedom. Then imagine this moment of clarity. You've spent years trying to outrun your cravings, punishing yourself for each relapse, believing every tug of addiction is proof of your weakness. But what if the real revelation is this: the more energy you pour into resisting addiction, the more energy it steals from you. And the very strategies you use, counting days sober, willpower battles, shame, are secretly feeding the same beast you're trying to starve. This is the paradox Jung dared us to face. Fighting the shadow with brute force only deepens its hold. Picture a cornered animal that grows more ferocious when attacked. Your willpower becomes the hunter, and the shadow, starved of conscious attention, lashes out in desperate bids for survival. Each moment of resistance inadvertently shines a spotlight on the wound, giving it the fuel to roar louder. But then, in that pivotal instant, you shift perspective. You stop battling and start listening. Instead of tightening your grip on self-control, you open a space inside to witness the pain without judgment. You feel the tremor of old grief, the echo of abandonment, the raw hunger for belonging. And as you sit with that discomfort, a remarkable thing happens. The compulsion begins to subside. It no longer needs to scream for your attention because you've already given it the stage. At that climax, when you choose curiosity over resistance, you reclaim the psychic energy that addiction once siphoned away. You realize that your enemy was never the substance, the behavior, or the person. It was the unacknowledged fracture within your own psyche. In that moment of radical acceptance, you become whole enough to no longer need the crutch. Society will still tell you that strength lies in domination. Conquer your urges, win the battle, prove your resolve. But Jung's insight flips this on its head. True strength emerges from compassionate integration. Freedom doesn't come from overpowering the shadow, it springs from illuminating it. What if everything you believed about addiction as a test of grit, as a moral failing, as a beast to be vanquished, was backward? What if the real victory lies not in pushing away your darkness, but in inviting it in, giving it voice, and finally recognizing it as part of you? When you step into that paradox, you see the world anew. You no longer chase relief in empty diversions. You no longer believe that abstinence alone is cure. Instead, you understand that healing addiction means healing yourself. And in reclaiming that stolen psychic energy, you awaken to a life fueled not by compulsion, but by authentic purpose. In that instant, addiction loses its power because you have found a deeper power within. Now that you've witnessed the hidden dynamics of psychic possession and the moment when listening to your shadow dissolves its power, let's bring these insights down to earth. Begin by carving out daily rituals of boundary setting. Notice where you bleed energy, an extra email at midnight, a relationship that demands more of you than you can give, the endless scroll that steals your presence. Decide, even in small ways, to say no. Let your no be a place of refuge for your psychic energy, a sacred margin where you can reconnect with your own pulse. Next, practice turning your attention inward. When a craving strikes, pause. Sit with the urge. Instead of labeling it bad and waging war, ask it, what are you trying to tell me? You might uncover loneliness, shame, grief, or a longing for purpose. Journal these discoveries without censoring yourself. As you give voice to the shadow's cry, you shift energy from compulsion into conscious understanding. Over time, the craving dissolves because its message has been received. Cultivate moments of solitude, true solitude without podcasts, without background noise, without stimuli. Let silence become your ally. In the quiet, you'll discover rhythms you never knew existed, the real beat of your heart, the slow echo of your breath, the half-buried hopes that flicker beneath the surface. Protect these interludes fiercely. They are where individuation takes root, where your authentic self can emerge from the ashes of distraction. Balance this inner work with acts of creativity and service that feel nourishing rather than depleting. Paint, write, garden, teach, listen to a friend without seeking validation. Choose activities that fill your reservoir because they align with your deepest values. Each time you invest energy here, you reclaim territory that addiction once claimed. You prove to yourself that life can be fueled by purpose, not by the fleeting rush of avoidance. Philosophically, this journey invites you to reconsider what it means to be free. Society teaches us freedom is the absence of limits, a world of infinite options, infinite distractions. But Jung's deeper truth shows that true freedom comes with boundaries, the boundary between what serves your soul and what steals your energy. When you draw that line, your choices become clearer, your mind quieter, and your spirit more present. Authentic living is not the pursuit of more, it is the courageous practice of less, focused on what truly matters. So here's your invitation. Look at your life and ask, where am I pouring my energy into ghosts? Where have I given my power to distractions that promise relief but deliver only emptiness? And then, what one boundary can I set today, one small no, to begin reclaiming that energy? Share your answers in the comments and see how this community begins to transform, one reclaimed moment at a time. If this exploration resonated with you, hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss a journey into the depths of your psyche. And tell me, what did you discover when you sat with your craving instead of fighting it? How did that moment of listening change you? Your story could be the spark that helps someone else let addiction lose its grip and find their way back to themselves.